Hey everyone! When life is really busy and active and revolves around pushing boundaries, both physically and mentally, a sudden illness like long COVID can feel like a major, shocking betrayal. It can leave us feeling frustrated, lost, and uncertain. But what if it's an opportunity for growth? That's exactly what my guest today is here to talk about. Hi, everyone. I'm Raelan. On this channel, you'll find over 170 inspiring stories of recovery from conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID, all contributing to a research study that's exploring recovery themes and looking at how people get better. My guest today is David Cahoon over in Lafayette, Colorado, in the US. David's an engineer, a former athlete, and a dedicated Buddhist. His unique background and perspective on his long journey with long COVID is so intriguing. I am sure you're going to love him, and I know you will appreciate his insights. So let's welcome David. David, wonderful to have you here today. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So let's dive in.
So I'm an athlete. I'm really into mountain biking. I'm into fitness. I lift weights. Before COVID, I was a mountain bike racer. So somewhat of not a pro level athlete, but a fairly serious athlete. So after a workout, I woke up feeling like I had been run over by a truck overnight.
What was that like for you, going from someone who had been so active, it sounds like overall relatively healthy, to suddenly being so unwell?
I mean, it feels like you've lost your life. It feels like you can't do the things that you used to be able to do. And there's a deep sense of grief, sense of loss. You don't really understand what's going on with your body fully. And it takes everybody a certain amount of time to kind of come to terms with what's happened to them. And it takes longer to understand really what's happening and even wrap your head around the fact that recovery is possible, let alone how to recover. So yeah, it was very difficult. As far as my long COVID story goes, I got long COVID in February 2023. I had an asymptomatic case of COVID. In hindsight, there was some subtle symptoms, but I didn't think much of them. It didn't seem like anything that was sick. I just kind of had a headache, a little bit of, wasn't feeling exactly right, but it just didn't feel like a sickness. I had no idea I had COVID. I had, among other things, tinnitus, brain fog. I couldn't think clearly. I had gastrointestinal issues. I had high blood pressure and heart rate. My endurance and recovery were horrific. For those who are athletes and know what VO2 max is, I had a VO2 max of 50 that went down to 36 overnight, and also had issues with sleep. Sleep became something very difficult, and sometimes something that where I'd wake up feeling worse than I did before I went to sleep. After struggling through it for several months, about 6 months, I started to recover. But then I think due to COVID, I was hospitalized for diverticulitis for a few days. Yeah, after struggling through that, I got COVID again. Not too long after that, I managed to hurt myself in the gym. I tore a rotator cuff due to an injury that I had some years ago. Surgeon said it was just a matter of time, but had to get shoulder surgery in March. My business started picking up, and long COVID started coming back. So it's been difficult. I ran into a lot of obstacles.
And how did you start to get yourself into a place of believing that it was possible to recover and to start figuring out how that would be possible? Because this is something the whole world is trying to figure out.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it has to do with mindset. And that's why I'm here today, is to kind of talk about mindset. I have a firm belief that the body is capable of healing itself if you give it the right signals. And I never had any doubt that I would recover. Obviously, I've ran into a lot of obstacles that have been setbacks, but I never had any doubts that I would recover, and basically immediately started doing a lot of research. I'm also an engineer, so I kind of took that engineering mindset and did a lot of research on how to learn as much as I could and give myself the best chance of recovery. I do feel like I was lucky because I never was affected as badly as some other people were. I could always go out, maybe do like a very short walk, build my way up. So, yeah, I feel blessed that I never went through a period where I was completely incapacitated like some of the other people were.
You mentioned mindset, and you and I were talking about this a bit before we started the interview, how incredibly important it is. And with so many of the people that I've talked to, when I hear about their recovery journey, that mindset piece is huge, even though it's not something we tend to like to think about or talk about a lot, because it doesn't sound like, I think, how important can that really be with this intense
Yeah.
physical illness that I have? That doesn't sound like something that's going to deliver a lot. So, from your experience, what did the mindset piece look like, and how did that help you with your recovery?
Yeah. So for me, as I said, my mindset was that I was always sure that I would recover. I had no doubt in my mind. I knew that it was possible. I had another shoulder injury that I recovered from after where the surgeon said that this particular muscle would never recover. But after like a year and a half of doing exercises, it did recover. So I think part of that is just part of what of my beliefs. The reason why I'm here is because I listened to so many of your recovery interviews, and it was really easy to see that after watching so many of them that what's common with everybody that recovers is that they have a positive mindset. That particular mindset really aligns with Buddhist philosophy, and I feel like it really could be very helpful to people to have some understanding of like what a helpful mindset is for this particular issue for chronic fatigue and long COVID. I believe that that's the absolutely the most important part of the puzzle.
So, looking at this from a Buddhist philosophy perspective, in terms of mindset, what pieces of that are helpful with CFS recovery?
Yeah. Well, I'll say first a little bit that Buddhism is both a philosophy and a religion. In the East, it's often a religion where you'd go to a service. Here in the West, we often take it as a philosophy that's to be studied. And as such, it's something that you should test and see if it works for you. And if it works for you, then great. If not, then take what's useful and leave the rest for later. Don't have to worry about it. You don't have to buy all into Buddhism and become a Buddhist in order for this information to help. I guess the most important thing is that we should feel empowered in our lives. We should feel empowered to be able to make the changes that will create the life that we want. Okay. Everything that we're experiencing right now is a result of things that we've done in the past. And if obstacles come up, struggles come up, something bad happens, instead of seeing this as something bad, let's be grateful for it. Look at it as an opportunity. And I feel that when you encounter these obstacles, not to feel like that you're the victim of something, and to feel that you're empowered to actually change it. And not only that, to be grateful for it and to use it for something positive. I think it's something that I've noticed that every single one of your recovery stories involve somebody that has a positive view of their condition. Not just positive, but people that have really found that that in the end that it's made them a happier person. And the reason why it makes you a happier person is because it changes your view of life. It changes your view of reality in order to align with what's true, right? So you're seeing reality. So after going through this, it's going to actually change the way that you view the world to more closely match with the way the world actually works. And it's going to clear away your ignorance. It's going to clear away your karma, and it will eventually lead to you being a happier person.
Yeah, it's incredible how many people have said something along the lines of not even just recognizing everything that they've taken away from it, but almost gratitude for what they went through, which I know can be a very tough thing to hear when you're in the middle of it, because it is suffering and it is tough, and it's not something you'd wish on anybody. But given the choice, once you're through it, if you were presented with the option of taking that whole experience away and never having had to go through all that suffering, most people couldn't do it because it's completely transformed who they are as a person. And
Right.
no one, of course, wants to take away that transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. And personally, I've also noticed that it tends to affect people that have a certain outlook. And I can explain that a little bit because I think it's helpful. I've always been more of a type A personality. I've tended to ignore my emotions in my body. my life tends to be somewhat stressful. I'm a business owner, and what I like to do for fun is ride mountain bikes, and race cars. Those are not like relaxing, just kind of laying on the beach type activities, right? And not only that, but I'm really into physical fitness. So I'm out there and I'm working out, I'm running, riding my bike. And you put all that together, this is also kind of a common thread that I've noticed with your recovery stories too. We tend to push aside stress. We tend to be perfectionists, and we tend to be very hard on ourselves. So those are things that personally I had to work through a lot of emotion. So when I talk about transformation, I'm talking about something that's emotional, something that's very visceral. This isn't a change that you can just talk your way through. This is a change that you're going to have to feel. This is an emotional change in how you deal with yourself and deal with the world in general. So yeah, I didn't think I would get this emotional about it, but just bringing back everything that I've went through and some of the emotions that have come up when I've had to resolve in order to recover myself. And it's difficult. It's not the easiest thing because you might be dealing with a lot of trauma that you've gone through. You know, trauma causes fear and stress. You really need to get rid of that. You need to figure out how to deal with those issues constructively, I think, in order to recover.
Something I hear people mention a lot on their journeys is that a big thing they had to learn was self-compassion, and that this was a completely foreign concept to them until this point.
Yeah.
Had thought about it, didn't know what it was, and didn't realize how critical and how hard they'd been on themselves for most of their lives. It sounds like that was a part of your journey as well.
Yeah, so Buddhism is obviously huge on compassion, right? But my problem was that I was not compassionate with myself, and I think that's an important lesson to learn. It's like I found a way to find compassion for other people. You know, if they'd harm me, I'd see the value in that. Take it. I wouldn't take it personally, but for me, it's like I was a perfectionist, and I think that's something we have to give up. The more that you are a perfectionist, that also means that you're hard on yourself for everything that you don't do perfectly. And not only that, but I ignored stress. I just pushed it aside and didn't worry about it. I ignored trauma. Just wasn't something that I felt was valid. And the reason why is because trauma is a reaction of your ego and your body. And none of those things are ultimately valid. Like Buddhism teaches that ego is a mental construct. It's something that ultimately isn't real. And trauma is something that you can take two different people, expose them to the same stimulus, and one's going to be traumatized and the other one might not be traumatized. So it kind of has to do with like how you process stimulus. So I always pushed aside my stress and my trauma and never really dealt with them in a constructive way. And all of that is having compassion for yourself. You know, you have to understand that these things are treat yourself how you would like to treat other people. And it's like I'm treating myself harder than I would treat anyone.
Yeah. And perfectionism comes up a lot as well. And I think it's something we glorify a bit in the world. And it sounds like an admirable quality to have. But when we break it down, for most people, it's an experience of self-criticism and coming from a place of shame. Everything needs to be perfect, or I'm not good enough, it's not good enough. And finishing every day criticizing yourself, saying no matter how good you did, you need to do better. And
it's not helpful. That all adds to the stress. You know, and that's obviously what we've seen is that stress is the cause of the dysautonomia and causes the feedback loop, kind of keeps us from recovering. So the more we see things according to reality and the more productively we can see things and the less stress that we're going to experience and the more chances that you'll have of starting to recover. And I think that's why that everybody has some success in helping people recover, because it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back in reverse. Right. Even the doctor that I saw right after I had to go to the emergency room, who told me that it was simply anxiety. Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You just had an anxiety attack. It's like, well, okay, but it is as wrong as they are. If they treat people for anxiety that have long COVID and CFS, they're going to help some people recover, right? So anything we can do to reduce stress is going to help with recovery. So everybody has at least a small piece of the puzzle, at least something to offer.
You'd mentioned that you did a lot of research to help you understand recovery, and mindset has clearly been a massive piece. Were there other components in addition to mindset?
There's been a bunch of other things that I like to just briefly mention that helped me with recovery. And I think number one thing is probably breath and how we breathe. So breath is both conscious and autonomous. Since our nervous system is stuck in fight or flight, that affects the way that we breathe and tends to lead to chronic hyperventilation. There's a lot of different breathing techniques out there. So what we want to do is use a breathing technique that calms the nervous system, obviously. So things work both ways, right? The fight or flight response is going to cause dysfunctional breathing, but we can consciously replace that with breathing that will calm our nervous system. So breathing more in the way that we would breathe if we were not in fight or flight response. And there's a lot of tons and tons of information on breathing technique. But one I'd like to mention in particular, and that I'm especially grateful for, is Wim Hof. Yeah. His breathing techniques and cold exposure techniques have been invaluable to me. I believe that they can help you regulate your nervous and immune systems. And I also have personally experienced that Wim Hof cold exposure and breathing has basically stopped cytokine storm in its tracks a couple of times for me. There's been a couple of times where I feel like my lungs were under attack. All of a sudden I'd start wheezing and coughing, and it came out of nowhere. And honestly, I got in the shower, turned it cold. When you get in the cold, you have a particular reaction to it. So working your way through that reaction has the effect of resetting some of your systems. And then he also has a breathing technique that I think helps a lot too. And yeah, so I'd just like to say that I think looking at and practicing Wim Hof technique is really important. A lot of cultures around the world have rituals around cold exposure. You know, the Buddhists have a practice called tumo, and Wim Hof breathing is not dissimilar from that. It's a really common thing that we can do, and I think it really helped a lot. It helped me it was really invaluable to me in some circumstances.
What is Wim Hof breathing for people who aren't familiar? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so Wim Hof breathing, you just breathe in and fully and breathe out quickly and then fully if you can. This is also similar to the Indians also have yoga. Well, okay, I forget exactly off the top of my head what it's called, but this breathing technique is also ubiquitous throughout the world. So basically breathe in all the way, breathe out, and you repeat that 30 or 40 times. And then you breathe out and hold. And you can hold for sometimes quite a while because the previous breathing exercise has kind of super oxygenated your body. It also does, Wim has claimed that it does the same thing as being in a hyperbaric chamber, which has also been found to be useful for some people. So it has the same effect, but instead of having to pay a bunch of money and go to a chamber, all you have to do is just breathe. That's all you have to do.
I'll make sure we'll put some links for people watching in the video description that explain more about this. If you're unfamiliar with it and you want to learn more, we'll give you some places to look into. Because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but even myself, I'm not familiar with exactly how to do the techniques.
I think some people may find some supplements to be helpful. When I got COVID the second time, the eye drug definitely helped a lot.
The which?
The eye drug. I don't want to say exactly.
Oh, okay.
It begins with IVR, but
okay.
Yeah, I've had some of my comments probably automatically removed by typing that in. So
yeah.
Anyway, everybody knows what we're talking about. I think with some people, it can help. It might be worth trying if you're going through especially right after you've gotten COVID or had maybe a bad reaction from the whatever they give you to mitigate that reaction. Again, I don't want to say something that YouTube doesn't like. But a couple other things. I thought that black seed oil might be helpful. Hard for me to tell exactly. Some of these, it's really hard to kind of tell exactly because it's we're not doing these in scientific trials. So sometimes you just think maybe something will help. Black seed oil is something I thought might help. I also took a group of supplements that help with serotonin levels. I know some people have been tested to have low serotonin levels as a result of their issues. And a couple of those like 5-HTP, choline, taurine, tyrosine, and some B vitamins. That seemed to improve my mental outlook. And yeah, I think we're willing to try just about anything. I certainly have tried a lot of different things, but I can't really say for certain that anything has made like a really big difference, except for the things that I just mentioned. I think do a couple of other little things that I think might that people might find useful. That these are also a couple of things from Buddhist philosophy. One is gratefulness. So I think a lot of times we're not grateful for what we have. A lot of times we're not grateful for our life. A lot of times we're not grateful for the fact that we are blessed with this human life. So whether you buy into the reincarnation or not, the Buddhists say that human rebirth is precious and difficult to obtain. So we should have some amount of gratefulness just for the opportunity to experience what we are as human beings and take advantage of it as much as we can. And it is mentioned before that our obstacles are actual blessings and will lead to spiritual advancement, will lead to clearing of karma. And therefore, we should be grateful for everything that arises in our life, even though things sometimes seem very difficult and very horrible at the time. We don't have the perspective to understand things fully a lot of times. And then there's a caution. The caution is being careful of when you are overly sick or when you're doing really well and things are very easy. Both of those things can be traps. So when we're sick, sometimes we're sick obviously we mentioned stress as a result of stress, but what we don't want to get into is being glad that we are sick as a way to avoid life. And I think part of that is the view of being grateful for our life, right? So if we're grateful for our life and our number one goal is to help other people, the best way we can do that is by being healthy, right? So sickness is not the right refuge from life, right? The correct refuge for experiencing life is viewing life properly, viewing the world as it is. That's the right view that we were talking about. So that's the antidote to feeling that chronic fatigue or long COVID is a way to avoid a stressful life, is a way to avoid our problems. And then similarly, when we're doing really well and everything seems easy, then we get complacent and we don't do spiritual practice. We don't work to better ourselves as much. We don't work to help other people as much. So both of those things are potentially traps in life, and we want to be careful to not fall into those. And again, the way to not fall into those traps is simply by holding the right view of the world.
Oh my goodness, David, I couldn't possibly love all of this more. You have explained this all so well. The insights from Buddhism are just layered so perfectly, I think, on top of the experience of recovery from all of these conditions. It's really helpful. And just, yeah, it's incredible hearing about it from that perspective in such a good reinforcement and a reminder of all the things that we're trying to. So incredible. I have so much gratitude to you, David, for bravely doing this today and speaking to people about this. I'm sure they very much appreciate it. I appreciate it. I am wishing you so many good things on the remainder of your journey with this. And yeah, just from the bottom of my heart, a big thank you for sharing this today.
Oh, great. Well, I thank you very much for the opportunity to come on here and be able to make a contribution to helping people recover from these, from chronic fatigue and long COVID. So I think the service that you are providing is incredibly valuable. It's been very valuable to me. I think that it's going to advance our understanding of this condition. And I think that you are doing a huge service to humanity with the videos you've been you've been making.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you, David. It's incredible how we're all coming together and working together on this. I'm just thinking for people watching, I had another interview recently with a wonderful woman named Jenny. She's also a practicing Buddhist who had some really great insights. So if you enjoyed David's story in his interview, I'll link it up here because I think you'll really enjoy hers as well. And a thank you to one of the channel members that support this channel and help to make all of this possible and keep these recovery stories going. So thank you to Shauna Ashlock. Big hugs to you on your journey. Thank you for joining. I hope you're enjoying the extra channel member perks.
I've been a Buddhist for most of my life. I studied Buddhism with the Drikung Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. I encourage people who want more information about that to go to drikung.org. And also, if you want more information on Buddhism in general, looking at lionsroar.com could be helpful. I just want to say right off the bat, I'm not necessarily a qualified teacher of Dharma, which is Buddhist philosophy. But I'm going to do my best to convey how Buddhism might help people suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID as clearly as I possibly can. What we're really doing here is we're really aligning your view of the world with the way the world actually works. So the most important part about it, and what's kind of the most useful and relevant thing to actually recover from chronic fatigue and long COVID, is aligning your view of the world and how the world works with how it actually does work. So we have the first thing to understand about Buddhism is basics is the Four Noble Truths. And I'll just go over it very quickly because you need to have just a little bit of background to understand the rest of it. They are that suffering is pervasive in our world and that it is caused by ignorance. So ignorance is, and this is the mindset that we're talking about, is that we all have some amount of ignorance about the way that the world works and that we misunderstand the nature of reality as being separate. We see ourselves as separate from everything else. We see things as independent and solid. And none of those things are actually true. And they lead to misapprehensions. And then that leads to suffering. So another way, there's a couple of other ways of looking at that. One is wishing that things were different from how they are. That is the cause of suffering. Wishing for one's own happiness. You can also define it that way. And they're all the same thing. And they are, as far as the Buddhists are concerned, these are the causes of suffering. So we also go on, and the third point of the Noble Truths are that ignorance and obscurations are temporary, right? We all have a basic nature that's the same as the Buddha, and we are all perfect beings at our core. We just have some misunderstandings about things. So Dharma is the path to cessation of suffering, and Dharma is the Buddhist philosophy. So by studying and practicing Buddhism, eventually you'll get to a place where you can experience the cessation of suffering. Buddhist practice is defined by the Eightfold Path, and I'm not going to go over all of it because it's just too much information, but it includes wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. And the most important part of this for having the right mindset to recover from long COVID and chronic fatigue is called right view. And it's the first of the Eightfold Path. That involves having the right view of the Four Noble Truths that we just discussed, impermanence and interconnectedness of phenomenon, the concept of non-duality, which means that everything isn't separate from one another, and recognizing the nature of suffering, its causes, and the path to cessation. So we also have another factor in the Eightfold Path that really relates is the mental discipline of mindfulness, basically observing phenomenon with a clear and non-judgmental awareness. So being in the present moment. So those are all really important factors to understand just as background. So we'll go on and say that what I mentioned before is one of the most important things, and it has to do with kind of understanding why we're going through what we're going through right now. Having a perspective on where we are in our life is called karma. Karma is a very misunderstood and difficult to teach topic. So I'll do the best I can to explain it in a way that will be helpful and will allow you to. And the general thing here is to avoid having a mindset of a victim. If we feel victimized, I believe that will completely prevent recovery. So karma will explain why we are experiencing what we are right now and give you a useful frame of mind to relate to our issues. So basically, karma deals with cause, and it has to do with the current circumstances or the result of our past thoughts and actions. So it's kind of as clear as that. Karma deals with cause, and the effect is the effect of what we experience is the result of karma, or what we call the ripening of karma. So basically, we have this positive karma that can result in beneficial effects, but then we also have karma as a result of anger and ignorance, which is going to result in harmful consequences. Ultimately, the goal is to completely break the chain of karma and relinquish all of the actions and consequences that keep us in suffering. When you achieve enlightenment, a Buddha does not create karma. So enlightenment, the ultimate path, the ultimate goal of the path, can be understood as a freedom from karma. Now, karma is kind of like the force of gravity, right? Shouldn't be seen as God or something that hands out punishment or rewards for what we do. It simply just explains the way that the world works and how we get to where we are. And I think that this allows us to take responsibility for everything in our lives. So, and I think that's why it's good to understand, so that we can avoid having a victim mentality about everything that we go through in life. I think the victim mentality is one of the most harmful things that we can possibly have. And both as an individual and as a society and as a country, the victim mindset leads to victimization. Perpetrators perpetrate a place of victimhood. And you can see that with all aspects of both personal and societal behavior. So I believe that karma can be mitigated by following the Eightfold Path. So we can do things within this life to change our karma. What we do now affects what our future is going to be like. That's pretty obvious, but it's also something that people generally don't necessarily think about too much. So COVID has affected all of humanity, right? So this is something that we're going through all of humanity is going through it as a collective. So that means that we're going to experience things individually as a result of that. That may not have everything to do with what you've done individually, right? So it's going to be a result of what we've done collectively as human beings. So I think it's important to understand that as well. So let's see. So yeah, I think that kind of gives you I think by understanding karma, we can test it, see if that feels true to you, whether it relates to your life. And I think it provides like a background for seeing the world in a more productive and healthier manner, right? So Buddhism also has a couple of different schools. What I'm going to talk about is transformation of suffering, which is a more advanced concept. But I think it's also hard to understand, but I think it's pretty important to understand for recovery of chronic fatigue and long COVID, because that's what I feel like that's part of what chronic fatigue and long COVID is forcing us to do. It's kind of forcing us to take this obstacle and use it for something positive. And I think that's something that everybody that's recovered seems to have found a silver lining.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And before we move on to that, and I get that this might be kind of a big ask, but everything that you just explained, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and a lot of really great things stood out to me. Thank you to all of you watching. Looking forward to your thoughts and comments. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a ton out of it, and I hope to see you in this next one with Jenny.